I wanted to let everybody know that Cody was selected as the Homeland Security Director in 2018. Previously, he worked in that department as its business manager and the head of the Recovery and Mitigation Chief. He has led financial and program recovery operations during 14 presidential declared disaster declarations and numerous state disaster declarations. Cody just recently completed his term, a couple of terms as a Morton County Commissioner, most recently elected in 2016. So you're off the hook there, sounds like, as of the last election. He was chairman of that Morton County Commission from 2016 to 2017, and he was the chairman during the Dakota Access Pipeline protest, which of course took place prominently in Morton County, but known certainly around the world. Cody has an associate degree from Bismarck State College and a degree in business administration from Dickinson and an MBA from University of North Dakota. He enjoys hunting, fishing, baseball, and spending a lot of time with his niece and nephews. He's also an avid history reader. And wants to talk to us about what's going on today in the state, and basically, like a lot of you do, manage in a crisis and how we do that on a statewide basis with lots of planning. So Cody, I think we've got the screen shared for you and it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Lance. Just make sure I've got the right screen shared here, and which I do. So appreciate the intro, certainly. Good morning, everybody. Really excited to be with you this morning. Do wish it could be in person, obviously, but hope you're all staying safe and healthy as we try to navigate this current crisis we find ourselves in. Really excited to hear some progress on the vaccine, and hope there's a light at the end of the tunnel on that front. But thanks again for the intro, Lance, and the opportunity to talk about a subject that's really the purpose and reason for my job and for the agency that I lead. Crisis and emergency management is absolutely an important function within government, but really for any agency, public or private, and for any group, as small as a family. So understanding how to respond to a crisis well is something that we're all unfortunately going to have to deal with in our lifetimes, and likely more than once if you're in the business of water. So always like to start with our purpose here at the Department of Emergency Services. Our governor, my boss, has laid out a very simple purpose statement for state government. Why are we here? Simply put, it's to empower people, improve lives, and inspire success. And I can tell you I bought in very early on this purpose because it puts the focus on people, on the human beings that we serve. So everything we do here at the Department of Emergency Services, we do try to tie back to this purpose. But drilling one layer deeper on purpose, at the Department of Emergency Services, we look to eliminate or diminish all the negative outcomes associated with emergencies and disasters. That old cliche that an ounce of preparedness is worth a pound of cure is more than just a cliche to our team. We truly believe that preparedness through planning, training, and exercise clearly leads to more positive outcomes. So therefore, we try to focus our effort toward achieving what is our state preparedness goal, and that is identical to the national preparedness goal shown here on this slide, and this has been adopted by executive order. Simply a secure and resilient nation or state with the capabilities required across the whole community to prevent, protect against, mitigate, respond to, and recover from threats and hazards that pose the greatest risk. That is our purpose here at DES. Wanted to just very briefly give you an overview of what the Department of Emergency Services does and who we are. Crisis management and avoiding and recovering from crisis is what we do every day. Here you see an organizational chart of DES. We have two divisions. We have a division of state radio. That's the 911 answering center. That's led by my colleague, Dan Donlin. We answer 911 calls for over half the state geographically, 25 counties, serve 287 agencies and about 4,000 public safety staff. My side of the house, Homeland Security and Emergency Management. I serve two masters. I have two bosses, the Adjutant General Al Dorman, who is also the director of the Department of Emergency Services, where I serve as deputy director. And then obviously Governor Burgum, I am his Homeland Security advisor. But what we do, we have 5 and really 6 teams within the Homeland Security Division. Our finance and admin group is not on this org chart, but they do really important work. But this structure, the way we put our agency together is very, very similar to the incident command system, which many of you might be familiar with. And if not, I'll make you familiar with in just a couple minutes. But we ultimately focus on that state preparedness goal that I showed you earlier. What we do is primarily coordination of state agencies, the whole community. You're going to hear that term. That's public, private, federal, state, and local agencies. But we try to align efforts and capabilities to ensure that everybody's walking in the same direction when it comes to crisis and emergency response. So what skills and tools do we bring to the table? Whether we're addressing flooding or pandemics, there's very little we can do ourselves without bringing in and coordinating and collaborating with that whole community that I mentioned. That includes the public and private sectors. We bring organization and process and mechanics to that response and make sure that the collaboration is happening so the tools and skills are synchronized and we're delivering where and when we're needed. We look at ourselves kind of as a hub in a hub and spoke model as it relates to both organization and communication. Our primary focus is generally coordinating state and federal resources to serve both the public and private sector at the state and local level. So we're that organizing hub, that communications hub. This slide gives you just a little more granular look at some of the activities that we're responsible for. So what exactly are we talking about when we use these terms, crisis and emergency management? I won't read the definitions, but certainly a lot of crossover. Terms can be used interchangeably. But this next slide is really going to simplify kind of the fundamental considerations and what we're talking about when it relates to response to a crisis or emergency, and hope this kind of can give you some tools to use within your own organizations when these crises pop up. So at the risk of just really oversimplifying what we do, but emergency and crisis management at its core, in my opinion, really comes down to 3 things: structure, process, and resources. And this applies from everything to dealing with a family crisis or a catastrophic flood. First, structure, it defines and informs how we should be organized as an enterprise to deal with any emergency. One of the most important things to ensure that you organize yourself in a way that's flexible, efficient, and effective. And when you think about coming up with your organizational structure, you have to consider who your partners are going to be and what type of emergency you're responding to. After September 11th, 2001, the federal government refined a system and structure that had been in place a while and really used primarily in the fire world, responding to fires. And that's that incident command structure I referred to earlier. And it works incredibly well in crisis response and emergency management because it does those things I mentioned. It's flexible, it's scalable, perfectly enables smooth process and communication. So number 2 in these considerations is process. And that really tells us how the different parts of our structure interact and communicate with one another and our stakeholders. And then lastly is those resources. What resources are we going to need to respond to and recover from a crisis? These can be everything from human, material, or financial assets that are available to us when we prepare for and respond to and recover from emergencies. And as in almost anything of those resources, by far the most important are the human resources, our teammates, our stakeholders. So what you see here, just wanted to show you a little bit of that incident command structure. This is a template structure of ICS, and this goes back to those foundational structure, process, resources I just talked about. But this is a standardized approach to command and control, coordinating emergency response, provides a common hierarchy within responders from multiple different agencies and entities that can be effectively plugged in. We in North Dakota, we use this structure for response on all our emergency events because number one, it can be universally trained. There's also a common terminology and lexicon. So we're all speaking the same language within this structure. But it does those other things I mentioned as well. It's flexible, it's scalable. We've used this anything from small floods and droughts to the catastrophic flooding in 2009 and 11. Used it during DAPL, during the riots and protests, and we're using it right now for our response in the global pandemic. The other nice thing about this structure is you see an incident commander on the top of this, this structure. It can also be used for a unified command. Which we did in DAPL, where we had the National Guard and DES, along with Morton County and the North Dakota Highway Patrol, all acting as leadership in a unified command type structure. Nice thing about this structure as well, as I mentioned, it's interdisciplinary, flexible, can meet the following challenges. Meets the needs of jurisdictions, either by themselves or together, as I just mentioned, to respond to a wide variety of types of incidents. It helps meld a bunch of different people from different agencies into a unified structure. Provides logistical and administrative support that you're going to need in large-scale flood operations, and gives support to those operational staff, those boots on the ground that are doing the work. Also very cost-effective, and you can avoid duplication among agencies or within different pieces of the structure. And as I mentioned, it does provide a unified and a centrally authorized organization. I've mentioned this whole community a few times. Everyone in this virtual room shares something in common. We're all part of this team. And in these larger incidents that we see here in North Dakota, geographically, statewide flooding, things of that nature, in these larger events, you're almost certainly going to be dealing with stakeholders from across the spectrum in this thing we call the whole community. Have to be synchronized when we deliver our capability where it's needed, and to communicate with everybody that's part of the enterprise. The other thing, when we focus on this whole community, one thing that we're trying to do is knock down what we refer to as silos, these functional areas that can operate independently from the larger structure. Because that's going to cause problems both in your process and your communications, also just incredibly inefficient if we're not all synchronized. So we try to break down all of these silos, create synergies throughout the whole community, and make sure the partnerships are working the way they're going to. Because during crisis response, you're going to be thin on resources, and especially time. So anything we can do to be more efficient is going to help crisis response. And in these larger events, as I mentioned, we have to make sure that all the sectors are working together to address some of these common concerns that we have. This slide, I just kind of want to transition from talking about structure to get into this process that's so important during crisis response. I don't think I can overemphasize how important pre-incident processes are, the processes that we look at before the water's coming or the fire's going. Now, we certainly can't predict any type of crisis that may come, but what we can do is plan, train, and exercise with all of our internal and external partners that are going to be on the team responding to an emergency. So a big focus of any agency, but especially for something that I'm trying to lead here from an emergency management perspective, a big focus has got to be working on planning with the whole community to collaboratively build capacity and work as a team. So we try to do as much as that as we can during peacetime and focus on preparedness. So that collaboration happens throughout the enterprise and throughout what we refer to as the emergency management spectrum, from preparedness to response to recovery to mitigation. We try to focus a lot of our time in that preparedness and mitigation so that response and recovery are smoother, and we're not exchanging business cards when the levee's breaking. So all of these steps on this slide have to happen in order to build any capability that's both repeatable and sustainable. Plan, equip, train, and exercise together, and we're going to be able to respond together very, very well. And again, well, get back here. Just want to talk about process a little bit more, simplify it if I can. Regardless of the size of incident, your responses process are generally pretty standard. Information is that raw data that you're receiving, and in large crisis events, you're going to be getting information from many different sources. Don't always understand the credibility of that information. That's where when you context information and prioritize it, we say that turns information into intelligence. When you add that analysis, when you context it, when you gauge its credibility, that's intel. Once you have intel and it's analyzed, you can start making some assumptions and doing some planning. Once you have those plans in place, the next thing is the doing, actioning your plan into operations. And then lastly, but probably most importantly in our process, is that feedback. Getting that feedback from your internal team, your stakeholders, your customers, and incorporating that into your response to a crisis is going to make you much more effective. And depending on the type of crisis that you're looking at, this cycle can be happening, we call them operational periods. They can be hourly, daily, or weekly. It's a lot different maybe in a pandemic response where our operational periods are every 2 weeks, then it's going to be in a flood where those operational periods could be daily. So this cycle is going to repeat itself throughout a crisis response. But every one of these steps is incredibly important to responding effectively. And I could talk a lot about all the different resources that we have to respond to a crisis. And we do have warehouses full of pumps, generators, sandbags, trucks, and the like. But far and away, the most important resources we have is our people. It's our team, it's our customers, it's our partners. And that's where your attention is best focused when planning for response and recovery to emergencies and crisis. This is my team at DES, relatively small. We're less than 100, but we can surge pretty quickly to about 200. We have a reservist corps that we call on, anything from retirees, volunteers, folks from other agencies that have raised their hand and said, hey, if something happens, we want to help out. So just real public servants. But if I can make sure that my people are taken care of, if they have the support and the resources they need, I have no doubt that we're going to take care of our customers and our stakeholders. So hire good people, train them well, provide the resources they need, be available to mentor them, and ultimately hold them accountable. That is my philosophy on how you build an organization that can successfully navigate virtually any crisis that's thrown at you. Just want to touch on why all this is so important and why successful emergency and crisis response is so important. I truly believe North Dakota is the best place in the world to live, work, and play, but there's no getting around it. We have to admit it. We live in a land of extremes. If you just look at this list, we've had over 40 of those presidentially declared disasters in the past 25 years or so, and some catastrophic ones in there. The floods from 97, 2009, and 2011, we had over $2 billion just of public infrastructure damage, not to mention all the private infrastructure that was damaged. So I've recently joked that in the past years, North Dakota has had disasters of biblical proportions. Seems true, but we've had some really significant floods, droughts, and riots, and a historic pandemic that we're still continue to deal with. So that is the so what. That's why this is also important. Just really incredibly proud of Team North Dakota, of the work that we've done over the last 5 years, but really the last 25 years that we've been in this wet cycle. Just kind of have a picture collage here of some of the recent examples of how this whole community team has collaborated to bring relief to the people of our great state. Intermixed in here, you see some photos going back to 2016, the DAPL protest and associated riots. And then the following spring, 2017, while the protest was still happening and coming to an end, we had some pretty significant flooding in 2017, which was then followed almost immediately in the summer and fall of 2017 by one of the more significant droughts we've seen in the state in the last half century. And since then, numerous small and mid-level floods, 2018, 2019, 2020, also had a fall flood in 2019, which is relatively unique for us. And now, of course, the COVID response. So really, and COVID response for my team has been pretty unique trying to respond to this. So much of the other, even over the last quarter century, of all those responses that I showed on the previous slide, most of those, our partners and our stakeholders were other public safety entities and groups. For my team at DES and the Homeland Security world, we all speak a similar language, come from a similar culture, and a little bit different coming from the public health side. So melding and that meshing has taken, we've had a little bit of a learning curve, but we continue to learn and hopefully get better every single day. So just wanted to give you some kind of tips. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today, and thank you for all the important work that you guys do in this industry and the passion with which you do it. Water is such an important resource, and just ensuring that we have strong, healthy ecosystems and resources is really critical. So as I wind down here, I just want to kind of give you some tips and thoughts and considerations for you to put in your crisis management toolkit, because you almost assuredly will face a crisis or emergency during the course of your career if you're in the water business. First, just want to go back to kind of what I started with. Remember this structure, process, resource model. If you can organize your thoughts and efforts around this flow, it's going to make your response just so much more organized. Number two, I was once told by a writer friend, the old saw that good writers borrow from other writers, but great writers, they steal outright. So I think the moral being, if something's been proven to work, don't reinvent the wheel, use it. That incident command structure is flexible, it's scalable, it's widely taught. And we at DES do have a training and exercise section. If there's any training that you and your organization would like, my team here can likely facilitate that either directly or through county emergency managers where you are located. Third, one of the more difficult tasks that I've found in leadership positions in emergency management during response specifically is trying to create urgency without creating panic. And one thing that I've found is if you focus that urgency on the time sensitivity of creating a plan rather than the time sensitivity of actually doing something and taking action, I think this focus creates a mental process that's more functional, it's operational, and you can try to kind of pull that emotion out of it. So focus on the urgency of plan is going to help create urgency without creating chaos. Number four, never underestimate the importance of a plan. Earlier, I showed you this same graphic on the emergency management cycle. Another tendency during times of intense pressure is to just do something. And while that's an honorable instinct, acting without a plan usually turns out badly. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about a 20-page manifesto here, but a plan that's simple, but also formal is going to be incredibly helpful during time-sensitive crisis response. Next, just want to say, as with most things, communication's king. Whether you're a business, public entity, or a family, calm, deliberative communications is going to help guide you through a crisis. But when you're communicating, it's important to understand who your audience is when you're communicating. So hypothetically, if we're in the middle here at DES of one of these 500-year floods, that seems to happen about every 10 years or so here in North Dakota. But if we're in the middle of that, how I communicate with mayors and county commissioners is going to be different in both tone, substance, I guess, as well as medium than how I might communicate with the general public. So our cities, our counties are our partners and stakeholders. So we're more likely to communicate in person than we are through the media, social or traditional, like we would probably communicate mostly with our general public. So understand who your audience is when you're communicating is very important. Also, when you're communicating, why that's so important is if I'm communicating with the mayor of Fargo or the mayor of Flasher, it's going to be different in context and based on resource needs and just capabilities. So understand your audience. Also need to understand the purpose of your communication. Make sure you're purposeful. What are your desired effects? Based on those desired outcomes, the purpose of your communication can be really 4 things: to inform, influence, collaborate, or promote. And again, these outcomes are going to be different depending on your audience. Much more likely to communicate with the general public. Those communications are going to be more likely to be focused on informing or influencing. But communications for collaboration are going to be done with your stakeholders and partners. So simply, I guess my guidance, my advice, experience would be just simply always be focused and purposeful when you're communicating during a crisis. Another thing I just wanted to share is I've always tried to, whether it's we call peacetime or wartime, is to employ a leadership tactic of leadership by walking around. No better way to get a pulse of your organization than interacting with your team at their place of comfort. Go to them, don't have them come to you. And when you're engaging, I encourage you to use it as an opportunity to give them a mental break from that crisis response. Break away from that crisis. Have discussions about anything from family to hobbies to just general small talk. But you should be able to get a good feel for where they're at from a fatigue perspective and kind of the mental health just by engaging. And if in person, I know it's challenging, especially now in this virtual world, but in person is always better if you can do it with your team. Also encourage your managers and supervisors to do the same thing. Body language can tell us a lot. As I mentioned, challenging in this virtual environment, but it's much more difficult to read that body language. But invest the time, be persistent in your engagements with your team. And then I guess lastly, but incredibly importantly, when you're dealing with high stress situations like emergencies, it's important that you make sure you're taking care of your team in a holistic manner. Tough to find the time, but ensure that their physical health, mental health, spiritual health, all important. And then just also ensuring that everyone has a reasonable work rest cycle. That's one of the tougher things that I find with my team is everybody wants to be in the fight. They want the ball. But in these 8-9 month responses like we've seen in flooding in 2011, DAPL and now, you have to make sure that your team's getting that work rest cycle built so that they're fresh and they're taken care of. Depending on the size of your organization or the agency and the duration of the emergency, also just, if you could, just think very seriously about bringing in outside help. Many of us have employee assist programs in place, promote them, ensure that your team members that need help are getting it. Also a number of different resources available. We use everything from chaplains to employee assist programs to bringing in full-on mental and behavioral health professionals when needed. So just ensure that you're employing every resource available to take care of your team, because these are the people that are taking care of your organization and your customers. So lastly, just want to, again, thank you, Lance, and your leadership team for the time today. And just here's hoping that you won't have to employ any of these strategies in the near future, but try to encourage you to heed the Boy Scouts on this one and just be prepared. Thanks, everybody, for your time. Hope you all have a healthy, safe, and Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Cody. Appreciate your time and thoughts and leadership. It's what I always remember. I think about emergency management as you plan for lots and lots of things that you hope like the Dickens never happen. And,
exactly. Yes.
Would you take a question or two?
I would, certainly. Yep.
One that I've wondered about is you talked about the incident command structure and how that's a formalized approach that's worked time and time again. How, in your experience, has it worked when somebody local feels like they should be in charge or are in charge? Certainly they're the mayor or in your case, the chairman of the county commission or the fire chief. Do you delicately step in and say, let's do this together? Or how do you take charge without being bossy?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Lance. So I guess I've got two thoughts on that subject. Number one, ultimately, the buck stops at the elected official generally, especially at the local level, whether it's a mayor or a county commission. We have formalized that process, or when I was in my role at Morton County. Counties are a little bit different too. Sheriffs are independently elected. So if it's a law enforcement response, they have that by statute. But for some of these natural disasters, county commission, mayor, city commission should formalize that, name who that incident commander or who that unified commander is. But the other thing is, I would encourage the elected officials to resist the temptation to name an elected official for that, because there are policy considerations that are going to have to be made in terms of where are we spending money, who and when do we move places. So generally, I would encourage for the elected officials to appoint an employee in that, whether it's public safety, public works. We've seen in that incident command box on that org structure. We've seen it also where there are elected officials, but that does cause some problems at times. So I would encourage folks to, the electeds at least, to stay kind of in that policy advisory box if they can.
Great, thank you. I have a related question here. Wondering about, you talked about county commissions have a different role. And of course, we have a lot of water managers who are on water boards, and of course, they get pulled into some of these things. They all have an obligation, of course, for a public meeting notice and so forth. And some of these groups may only have 3 commissioners, for example. So is there a limitation on 2 of them talking to each other or riding to the disaster together in the same pickup? And is there exemptions to that?
It really isn't, as far as I'm aware, Lance. Yeah, you do have to be careful. In terms of if you're bringing folks in to meet and discuss business, is my understanding of the open meetings laws are those things can be done as a special meeting almost immediately with public notice. So do consult with your state's attorney or your city attorney on some of those things. And that's another consideration to the answer to my last question, where it's sometimes tough to have the electeds in that incident command box. But ultimately, whether it's at a regular meeting, a special meeting, there are going to be things from finance to policy that are going to have to be discussed. So yeah, have that, encourage you to also have your legal counsel connected at the hip, both to whether you're the elected policy leaders or that incident commander. And back to DAPL, we had kind of 2 different legal advisor groups. One was more that tactical criminal prosecution type legal advice. And then separately, we had that more policy civil legal advice as well. So